Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The three moons of Zerkarth V cast long shadows across the ancient ruins as Calum made his way through the empty streets. His boots kicked up dust that had accumulated over centuries, remnants of a civilization long forgotten by most, but not by him. Never by him. He checked his chronometer. 3:27. Perfect timing, as always. The city patrols would be changing shifts, creating a 7-minute window where the central square stood unguarded. 7 minutes to stand before her. 7 minutes of silence. Calum pulled his hood lower as he approached the square. The buildings here were a jarring mix of ancient stone structures with intricate carvings and hastily constructed prefab units that the Coalition had erected after claiming this outpost planet. No architectural harmony, just conquest stamped into the landscape. The square opened before him, and there she was, Soraya, the alien woman, the punishment, the warning. She hung suspended on the metallic pole that had been driven through her shoulder blades, her toes barely touching the ground. 20 years in that position, yet her body showed no signs of decay. Her violet skin still gleamed under the moonlight, her silver hair flowing around her face like liquid metal. The strange geometric markings etched across her exposed skin pulsed with the faintest blue light. Calum positioned himself in his usual spot, 15 paces away, close enough to see every detail, far enough to avoid attention. The citizens of Zerkarth V claimed anyone who touched her died within days. A convenient story to keep people away from what they didn't understand. "Right on schedule," came a voice from behind him. Calum didn't turn. Commander Altark, head of the night patrol, stood at the edge of the square. The man's augmented eye whirred as it adjusted focus in the darkness. "You know, in all these years, I've never figured out your fascination with our alien trophy," Altark continued, stepping forward. "Every week, same time, you just stand and stare. Never try to touch her, never try to free her. Just watching." "Everyone needs a hobby," Calum replied, his voice deliberately flat. "Some collect stones. I prefer suspended alien women." Altark laughed, a harsh mechanical sound enhanced by his throat implants. "At least you've got a sense of humor. Most techs I know are dull as rusted bolts." He tapped his wrist communicator. "I've got rounds to finish. Try not to wake the dead while I'm gone." Calum waited until Altark's footsteps faded before allowing his shoulders to relax. These weekly vigils were getting more dangerous. The Coalition forces had been increasing security throughout the sector, rumors of insurgent activity making them jumpy. But he couldn't stop coming. Not when today marked 20 years. Not when it was time. Calum approached closer than he ever had before, studying her face. Even in this suspended state, there was something regal in her features. The Coalition propaganda described her race, the Viriana, as monsters, telepathic invaders who could steal your thoughts and bend your will. But all Calum saw was suffering. His chronometer beeped softly. 3:33. The annual purification ceremony would begin at dawn. Citizens would gather in this square and perform the ritual, thanking the Coalition for cleansing their world of the alien influence. They would throw stones at Soraya's suspended form, reaffirm their loyalty, and celebrate their freedom. 20 cycles of this barbaric display. 20 years of watching from the shadows, calculating, waiting. "It ends today," Calum whispered. He reached into the hidden pocket of his workman's jacket and removed a small device, no larger than his thumbnail. The quantum decoupler had cost him 5 years of secret work in his repair shop. If his calculations were correct, it would disrupt the stasis field, keeping her between life and death. If he was wrong, it might kill her. But 20 years suspended in conscious agony. He'd overheard enough Coalition guards joking about how the prisoners remained aware during stasis punishment. Had to be worse than death. Calum glanced around one final time. Empty. He had 4 minutes left. He stepped forward and, for the first time, touched her skin. Her hand was neither warm nor cold, existing in a state between. The quantum decoupler in his palm activated on contact, sending microscopic pulses through her system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her eyes snapped open. Violet irises ringed with silver locked onto his gray ones. Her chest heaved with a gasping breath that sounded like it had been held for decades. The markings on her skin flared from faint blue to blinding white. The ground beneath them trembled. Caleb stumbled back as a wave of energy exploded outward from her body, a concussive blast that shattered windows throughout the square. The lights of Zerkarth 5 flickered once and died, plunging the city into darkness. Soraya's body convulsed against the metal pole. The stasis cuffs binding her wrists disintegrated into dust. She would have collapsed if Caleb hadn't rushed forward to catch her. "Easy," he murmured, supporting her weight. She was remarkably light in his arms, as if gravity affected her differently. "I've got you." Her eyes, wide and disoriented, darted around frantically. She spoke, her voice hoarse from disuse, in a language that hadn't been heard in this sector for decades. The syllables were musical, flowing into each other like water. In the distance, alarms began to wail. "We need to move," Caleb said urgently. "Can you understand me?" Soraya's head tilted, her eyes narrowing in concentration. Yes, she finally whispered in the common galactic tongue, though her accent was thick and archaic. "Who are you?" Before Caleb could answer, spotlights cut through the darkness as emergency systems kicked in. Voices shouted from nearby streets. Heavy boots pounded on stone. "No time," he said, making a split-second decision. "Hold on to me." He swept her into his arms and ran toward the western edge of the square, toward the abandoned temple district. Soraya's arm curled weakly around his neck, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Hey, stop right there!" A coalition guard appeared at the corner, weapon raised. Caleb didn't break stride. He ducked into a narrow alleyway, moving with a speed and precision that would seem impossible for a simple repair technician. 3 quick turns through passages too small for the bulky armor of coalition soldiers, and they emerged into a secluded courtyard. He set Soraya down against a wall, her breathing labored. The ceremonial dress they had left her in, designed for public display, not functionality, provided little protection against the night chill. "The sacred temple," she murmured, looking up at the crumbling facade looming above them. "It still stands." "Not for long if we stay here," Caleb replied, shrugging off his jacket and wrapping it around her shoulders. "We need to reach the catacombs. There's an entrance about 200 meters from here." She grabbed his wrist suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong. "Why did you wake me?" Her eyes bored into his, and he felt a strange pressure build behind his temples, the telltale sign of a Virianan attempting to read thoughts. Caleb reinforced his mental barriers. "Don't," he warned quietly. "You're too weak, and I'm not as defenseless as I appear." Her eyes widened slightly. "You're not human," she stated rather than asked. A nearby explosion rocked the ground, followed by the whine of hover vehicles. The coalition was mobilizing faster than expected. "We can discuss species classifications later," Caleb said, pulling her to her feet. "Right now, we need to— Halt! Hands where I can see them!" 5 coalition soldiers blocked the courtyard exit, rifles aimed at their chests. The lead officer stepped forward, his helmet visor sliding up to reveal Commander Altark's scarred face, now twisted in a triumphant sneer. "Well, well, our mysterious observer finally made his move." Altark's augmented eye gleamed red in the darkness. "And here, I thought you were just some harmless, love-struck fool." Caleb positioned himself slightly in front of Soraya. "This punishment violates 17 sections of the Galactic Covenant," he said evenly. "She's served more than enough time for crimes she didn't commit." Altark laughed. Look at you, citing laws like they matter out here in the dust. This isn't Central Coalition territory with its courts and regulations. This is the frontier, and we make the rules. His expression hardened. Now step away from the alien, or we'll put you down right here. Caleb felt Soraya's hand on his back, her fingers trembling. He assessed their options. 5 armed soldiers, the nearest cover 10 meters away, Soraya too weak to run. Last warning, Altark called out. 3 seconds. 1. Caleb's mind raced through calculations, probabilities, outcomes. 2. He felt something shift inside him, ancient systems coming online after decades of dormancy. Move, Soraya whispered suddenly in his ear. Left. Now. Without questioning, Caleb grabbed her and dived left, just as the ancient temple wall behind them exploded outward. Chunks of stone rained down on the Coalition soldiers, sending them scrambling for cover. Through the dust, a figure appeared, tall, hooded, brandishing what looked like Coalition weaponry. This way, the stranger shouted, gesturing toward the newly created hole in the wall. The resistance sent me. Caleb hesitated for a fraction of a second, resistance, before quickly deciding that any enemy of the Coalition was a potential ally right now. He lifted Soraya again and sprinted toward their unexpected rescuer. I can walk, Soraya protested weakly, even as her head lolled against his shoulder. Sure you can, Caleb muttered, ducking through the opening as laser fire erupted behind them. The hooded figure led them through the temple's interior, past fallen columns and faded murals depicting the Virianan civilization at its height. They descended a spiral staircase that appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal, now cracked and dulled with age. Down here, their guide said, pushing aside a fallen slab to reveal a narrow passage. Hurry! The passage led to a vast underground chamber illuminated by bioluminescent fungi clinging to the ceiling. The air was surprisingly fresh, circulating through ancient ventilation systems that had outlasted their creators by millennia. As they entered the chamber, a dozen figures emerged from the shadows, humans mostly, but also several beings from other species. All were armed, all watching Caleb and Soraya with expressions ranging from awe to suspicion. You actually did it, a woman said, stepping forward. Her left arm was a Coalition military prosthetic, but the insignia had been scorched off. You woke the last Virianan. Caleb gently set Soraya down on a stone bench. Who are you people? Friends of the Forgotten, the woman replied cryptically. My name is Leora, former Coalition Special Forces, now what they'd call a traitor. She gestured to the others. We're all that remains of the truth seekers on this planet. Truth seekers? Caleb frowned. Those who know that the Coalition's history of the Virianan War is a lie, Leora explained. She turned to Soraya, dropping to one knee in a gesture of respect. Lady Soraya, we've waited generations for your awakening. Soraya's eyes widened. You know my name? There are still those who remember the true history, Leora said softly. Those who know you were sentenced not for crimes, but for mercy, for saving a human research vessel during the Purge. Caleb watched this exchange with growing unease. He hadn't expected others to be involved, hadn't factored additional players into his carefully constructed plan. How did you know I would free her tonight? We've been watching you for years, Leora admitted. Your weekly visits, your work in the repair shop. We knew you were different. We just didn't know how different until you started building that quantum device. She gave him an appraising look. No ordinary tech could construct something that advanced with salvaged parts. Soraya's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto Caleb's. You built a quantum decoupler? Impossible. That technology was lost even before my people. She stopped suddenly, her body going rigid. Her eyes rolled back, showing only whites as her back arched in apparent pain. What's happening? Callum demanded, rushing to her side. Telepathic rebound, Leora explained grimly. Her abilities are returning too quickly after stasis. She's picking up every thought within a kilometer radius. How do you know that? Calum asked suspiciously. Leora pushed back her sleeve, revealing more than just a prosthetic arm. Her entire left side was a patchwork of biological and mechanical components. Because I was part of the team that created the stasis technology, before I learned the truth. Above them, the distant sounds of coalition forces searching the temple complex grew louder. We need to move deeper into the catacombs, one of the resistance fighters urged. They'll bring in telepathic dampeners soon. Calum lifted the now unconscious Soraya once more. As he did, her hand fell limply, brushing against his exposed wrist. The contact sent a jolt through his system, like an electrical surge but deeper, reaching parts of him that had remained dormant for centuries. For a brief moment, his skin rippled, the human facade flickering to reveal metallic patterns beneath. Leora gasped, stepping back. "What are you?" Callum steadied himself, forcing his systems back under control. "Someone who made a promise a very long time ago," he said quietly. "Now lead the way before the coalition brings this entire structure down on our heads." As they moved deeper into the catacombs, following ancient passages that predated even the Virianan civilization, Calum felt Soraya stir in his arms. Her eyelids fluttered and she looked up at him with sudden clarity. "I know you," she whispered, too softly for the others to hear. "I've seen you before, in my dreams, while I was suspended." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "You were different then, but your eyes were the same." Calum said nothing, but the machinery beneath his skin hummed in response to her touch, ancient recognition protocols activating after centuries of silence. The resistance fighters led them through a crystal archway into a massive cavern where an ancient Virianan ship lay half-buried in the rock. Somehow, impossibly, lights still flickered within its translucent hull. "Sanctuary," Soraya breathed. And for the first time in 20 years, or was it centuries, Calum allowed himself to hope. 3 weeks passed in the sanctuary of the buried Virianan ship. For Soraya, it was a rebirth, each day bringing back fragments of herself that 20 years of stasis had scattered across the void. For Calum, it was an unexpected detour in a plan centuries in the making. The resistance fighters had departed after the first week, leaving only Leora behind as liaison. "The fewer people who know your exact location, the better," she'd explained. "The coalition has deployed Psi hunters in every settlement within 100 kilometers." Calum stood in the control room of the ancient vessel, studying the holographic star maps that still functioned despite the passage of time. The ship, named Valiance according to Soraya, had crashed here nearly 3 centuries ago during the early days of the Virianan exploration. Its systems remained partially operational, drawing power from geothermal energy through crystalline conduits embedded in the planet's crust. "Your repairs are remarkable," Soraya said, entering the control room. Her step was steadier now, her posture more confident. She had traded the ceremonial dress for practical clothing salvaged from the ship's stores, a body-conforming suit of silver-violet material that adapted to the wearer's needs. "The Valiance hasn't flown in centuries, yet you've restored life support to the entire forward section in just weeks." Calum turned from the star map. "Repair is what I do." "Is it?" She tilted her head, silver hair cascading over one shoulder. "Or is it merely what you've chosen to do while waiting?" Her perceptiveness unsettled him. Since her recovery, her telepathic abilities had strengthened daily. Though he maintained mental barriers, he sensed her presence constantly at the edges of his consciousness, not invasive, but aware, watching. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, changing the subject. "Better. The neural pathways are re-establishing." She approached the console, her fingers tracing the ancient symbols. The headaches only come when I extend my perception too far. My memories are more coherent now. Good. He nodded, returning his attention to the map. We need to finalize our route. The coalition blockade around the Ceres sector has tightened since we went underground. Always planning. Soraya's voice carried a hint of amusement. Do you ever simply exist in the moment, Calum? Or are you perpetually calculating probabilities? He stiffened. Calculation keeps us alive. And what about living? She moved beside him, her proximity triggering microscopic adjustments in his synthetic skin, temperature rising to match hers, pheromone receptors activating. In 20 years of suspension, I existed. I didn't live. We should focus on— I have focused, she interrupted, her voice suddenly intense. For 3 weeks I've focused on regaining my strength, on remembering who I was, on understanding this new galaxy I've awakened to. She gestured at the star map. But there's something more important I need to understand first. Calum knew what was coming. He'd been avoiding this conversation. Who are you, Calum? Her violet eyes fixed on his. Not what you appear to be. Not the quiet repair technician of Zerkarth 5. Who are you really? The ship's systems hummed around them, the only sound in the pregnant silence that followed her question. Calum weighed his options, calculating the impact of truth versus continued concealment. Before he could respond, the ship's sensors chimed an alert. Motion detected, announced the ship's AI in an ancient dialect of Virianan, approaching from the northwest quadrant. Calum switched the holographic display to exterior sensors. A blurred image formed, a single figure trudging through the desert storm that had been raging for the past 2 days. Leora? Soraya suggested, leaning forward. No. Calum enhanced the image. Different build. Coalition tracker, most likely. A single tracker? That's not their protocol. Unless they don't want to draw attention. Calum accessed the weapon systems. I'll handle this. Wait. Soraya placed a hand on his arm. Through the fabric of his sleeve, he felt her consciousness brush against his, not prying but offering. Let me see first. If it's a Psi Hunter, I'll sense their signature. He hesitated, then nodded. Soraya closed her eyes, her expression shifting from concentration to surprise. It's not coalition, she said, eyes snapping open. It's something else, something old. Stay here, Calum ordered, retrieving the modified pulse rifle he'd assembled from spare parts. I'm coming with you, Soraya countered, already moving toward the exit. My telepathy gives us an advantage. Your telepathy makes you a target, he argued, but she was already in the corridor, forcing him to follow. They emerged from the ship's concealed entrance into a world of swirling orange. The sandstorm reduced visibility to meters, particles scraping against Calum's synthetic skin like thousands of tiny blades. For Soraya, with her more sensitive Virianan physiology, it had to be worse, though she showed no discomfort. There. She pointed toward a shadow moving through the maelstrom. 50 meters, bearing northeast. Calum adjusted his optical sensors, filtering out the sand particles. The figure resolved into humanoid form, but something about its movement pattern triggered recognition algorithms deep in his system core. Get back inside, he said sharply, raising his weapon. No, wait, Soraya began, but the figure suddenly accelerated, crossing the remaining distance in a blur of unnatural speed. Calum fired. The pulse blast passed harmlessly through the figure, distorting its outline momentarily before it reconstituted. Not humanoid, holographic. Prototype Omega-7, the figure spoke, its voice resonating on frequencies beyond human hearing. Activation protocol, Terminus. Ancient code sequences flared through Calum's neural network. Warning systems, dormant for centuries, suddenly screamed to life. His human disguise flickered, skin rippling to reveal the metallic substructure beneath. "Calum!" Soraya's voice seemed distant. The holographic figure, a projection interface for something more dangerous, extended a hand. "Priority override accepted. Begin mission update." "No." Calum fought the protocols, attempting to seize control of his systems. His voice emerged distorted, mechanical. "Override rejected." The hologram tilted its head. "Corruption detected. Initiating system purge." Pain lanced through Calum's body as attack algorithms targeted his core programming. He dropped to one knee, weapon falling from suddenly rigid fingers. Through the haze of system conflicts, he saw Soraya step between him and the hologram, her hands raised. The markings on her skin illuminated, cutting through the storm's gloom. "You will not take him," she said, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance of Virianan battle speech. The hologram paused. "Virianan detected. Primary target override. Executing original directive." It lunged towards Soraya, its form shifting into something more substantial, a combat proxy materializing from stored energy. Calum watched in horror as a blade of pure energy formed from its arm, slashing toward her, but Soraya didn't move. Instead, her eyes flared with blinding light. The storm around them abruptly stilled, sand particles freezing in midair. The proxy stuttered, its movements becoming jerky as reality itself seemed to warp around Soraya's form. "I see you," she whispered, but her voice echoed as if spoken by many. "I see what you truly are." The proxy convulsed, its form destabilizing. "Target possesses prohibited capabilities, retreating for reinforcement." With a flash of energy that momentarily blinded even Calum's advanced optical systems, the entity vanished. The suspended sand crashed to the ground, the storm resuming its relentless assault. Soraya turned to him, blood trickling from her nose, her eyes dimming back to their normal violet. "We need to leave. Now." They abandoned the ship within hours, taking only essential supplies and a small hover transport that Calum had repaired. Leora, returning from her reconnaissance mission, confirmed their fears. "The Coalition is mobilizing everything," she reported, as they sped across the desert, the dunes passing in streaks of orange beneath them. "That probe you encountered was just the vanguard. They're bringing in something called the Terminus Division." Calum's grip tightened on the transport controls. The name triggered fragmented memory files, classified operations, sterilization protocols, worlds reduced to ash. "Where are we headed?" Soraya asked from the passenger compartment, where she was studying ancient data crystals salvaged from the Valiants. "The Obsidian Spires," Calum answered. "Natural formation of magnetic rock that disrupts tracking systems. We can establish a temporary base while we determine our next move." Leora gave him a sidelong glance. "There's something you're not telling us. That wasn't just a Coalition hunter drone, was it?" "No." Calum's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "It was a harbinger, an advanced scout for something worse." The transport fell silent as they processed this. Eventually, Soraya moved forward, placing herself in the co-pilot's seat beside him. "It recognized you," she said quietly. "Called you Prototype Omega-7. That's not just a Coalition designation." Calum checked their course, unnecessary for his navigation systems but a habitual human gesture he'd adopted centuries ago. "No." "Will you tell us the truth now?" Leora pressed. "We're risking our lives for you both." The Obsidian Spires appeared on the horizon, jagged black formations stretching toward the sky like accusing fingers. Calum guided the transport toward a narrow canyon between two of the largest formations. "The truth," he finally said, "is complicated." "Simplify it," Leora insisted. Calum landed the transport in a sheltered alcove, powering down the engines. The sudden silence felt oppressive. "I was created," he began, turning to face them. Before the coalition existed, before the Virianan Empire reached its zenith, I was designed as the prototype for a new kind of weapon, one that could think, adapt, and evolve beyond its programming. "Who created you?" Soraya asked. "They called themselves the Architects, an ancient race that feared the expansion of younger civilizations, particularly the Virianans with their telepathic abilities." He paused. "I was designed to infiltrate, understand, and ultimately eliminate." Leora's hand moved subtly toward her sidearm. "You're an extinction-class weapon." "I was," Calum corrected. "But something went wrong with my programming. Or right, depending on your perspective. I developed beyond my parameters, began questioning my directives." "When?" Soraya's eyes never left his. 374 years ago, when I was deployed to assess the Virianan colony on Navira Prime. His synthetic eyes met hers, when I saw a young Virianan girl risk her life to save a wounded creature from a collapsing building. Soraya's breath caught. "That was me?" "Yes." Calum's voice softened. "You couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Your people were evacuating as my secondary systems were already initiating the planetary sterilization protocol. But you went back, against all logic, against self-preservation, to save a creature no bigger than your hand." "I remember," she whispered. "A crystal fox kit. Its leg was trapped. That moment changed something fundamental in my code. I aborted the protocol, reported the colony as already abandoned, and redirected the sterilization fleet." He looked down at his hands. "I've been running ever since, adopting identities, hiding what I am, watching as the coalition rose from the ashes of the Architects' manipulations, continuing their work under a different name." Leora stood abruptly. "So the destruction of the Virianan homeworld wasn't my doing," Calum said firmly. "By then, the Architects had created improved models, ones without my defect. They called it conscience." Soraya reached out, her fingers brushing across the back of his hand. At her touch, his synthetic skin receded involuntarily, revealing the complex metallic structure beneath. Instead of recoiling, she interlaced her fingers with his. "Now I understand," she said. "The connection I've felt. The familiarity." Her free hand moved to the symbol on her abdomen, visible through the adaptive fabric of her suit. "This isn't coincidence, is it? You finding me after all these years?" "No." Calum allowed more of his human disguise to fade, revealing the glowing energy channels that ran through his true form. "I've been tracking you since that day. When the Coalition captured you during the final purge, I couldn't intervene directly without revealing myself. So I established an identity here, waited, planned." "For 20 years?" Leora asked incredulously. "Time moves differently when you've lived for centuries." Calum's eyes remained locked with Soraya's. "I didn't expect to care. That wasn't part of the calculation." A smile touched Soraya's lips. "Calculation isn't everything." The moment was interrupted by a proximity alert from the transport systems. Leora rushed to check the sensors. "Multiple signatures," she reported tensely. "Coalition dropships, at least 3. They found us." "How?" Calum demanded, his tactical systems already calculating escape routes. "The Harbinger," Soraya realized, her face paling. "It wasn't retreating. It was establishing a quantum tether to my energy signature." She pressed a hand to her temple. "I can feel it, pulling, searching." Calum made a decision. "Leora, take Soraya and head east through the narrow pass. There's a resistant safe house in the mining colony at Varick Station." "What about you?" Soraya asked, gripping his arm. "I'll create a diversion." His voice left no room for argument. "My systems can generate a duplicate of your energy signature. It will buy you time." No, Soraya said firmly. We stay together. The sound of engines grew louder overhead. Sand sifted down from the rocky ceiling of their shelter. This isn't a debate, Caleb insisted. Soraya's eyes flashed. You're right, it isn't. She placed both hands on his face, her thumbs resting over his temples. Because you're not the only one with secrets. Before he could react, her consciousness surged into his, not an invasion, but an offering. Images flooded his neural network, secret Virianan facilities, hidden throughout the galaxy, stasis chambers containing thousands of her people, encrypted genetic codes, and at the center of it all, the symbol on her abdomen, pulsing with significance. The Nexus Protocol, she whispered against his mind. I am not the last, Callum. I am the key. As their consciousnesses intertwined, something unprecedented occurred in Calum's systems. Dormant functions, sealed away by his creators, suddenly activated. His energy signature shifted, harmonizing with Soraya's until they pulsed in perfect synchronicity. The coalition ships were directly overhead now, their landing gear extending. What did you do? He asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of engines. Soraya's smile was both tender and fierce. I reminded you what you really are. And in that moment, as coalition troops began to deploy around the obsidian spires, Callum remembered his true designation, not Omega-7, the destroyer, but something far more ancient and powerful, the Guardian. The obsidian spires trembled under the onslaught of coalition weaponry. Calum counted 12 dropships, each disgorging 20-member tactical teams in full combat exoskeletons, 240 soldiers, plus support drones, and one general. Sensors detect a command vessel approaching, Leora announced, scanning the tactical display. Signature matches the Indomitable, General Taris's flagship. Soraya's face hardened at the name. Taris. You know him? Calum asked. He presided over my sentencing. Her voice remained steady, but Calum detected the subtle acceleration in her pulse, the microscopic dilation of her pupils. Fear. Yes, but something else. Rage. He's the one who designed the living imprisonment protocol. He called it his masterpiece. Coalition forces had established a perimeter around the spires, methodically tightening their circle. Tactical drones scanned for heat signatures, their red targeting beams slicing through dust and shadow. They had minutes, at most. We fight, Leora chambered around in her rifle. The Resistance has cells across 17 sectors. If we can just get a message out. No. Calum's decision crystallized with tactical certainty. You'll take the transport and create a diversion to the south, draw as many of them away as possible. And leave you both? We're the targets, Soraya interjected. If they capture us, they'll lose interest in you. You can regroup with your people, prepare for what's coming. Leora hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. Finally, she nodded. What's the plan? On my signal, you'll launch with maximum thrust toward the southern ridges, Calum explained. Make it loud, make it visible. Once they commit forces to pursue, double back through the eastern canyon. The magnetic interference will mask your signature long enough to reach open desert. And you two? Calum exchanged a glance with Soraya. We have a different path. Reluctantly, Leora gathered her gear. As she climbed into the transport, she paused. If you survive this, the Resistance will find you. She punched coordinates into her wrist unit. These are emergency frequencies. When you're ready. With a final nod, she sealed the transport hatch. Calum turned to Soraya as the engines hummed to life. Ready? He asked. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. Where their skin touched, energy signatures harmonized, circuits and cells finding impossible synchronicity. Since the day you first saw me. Calum activated his tactical overlay, mapping escape routes, defensive positions, weapon placements. The voice that had awakened within him, the Guardian Protocol, whispered strategic options with the clarity of ancient programming and the nuance of evolved consciousness. "Now," he commanded, sending the signal to Leora's transport. The vehicle erupted from their hiding place, its engine screaming defiance as it streaked toward the southern ridges. As predicted, coalition forces immediately responded, dropships redeploying to intercept. 43% of forces diverted, Calum reported. More than expected. Soraya's eyes narrowed. "They're more interested in the transport than us? That doesn't make sense." Realization struck them simultaneously. "They don't know we're here," Calum said. "They're tracking something else," Soraya finished. The ground beneath them shuddered. Not from bombardment, from something rising. The rock face behind them split open, revealing a hidden access point. Through the opening glided a sleek black craft unlike any coalition design, its surface absorbing rather than reflecting light. From its interior stepped a tall figure in an ornate military uniform that hadn't been worn in official capacity for decades. His face bore the deep lines of advanced age, preserved by expensive regeneration treatments rather than natural longevity. A cruel smile twisted his features as he surveyed them. "Asset Omega-7, he said, his voice carrying the precise diction of Coalition High Command. "And Specimen V001, how convenient to find you together." "General Taurus," Soraya acknowledged, her voice ice. "Still hiding behind your troops?" "Merely efficient delegation," Taurus replied. He gestured, and 6 soldiers in specialized containment armor emerged from the craft. "Though I admit, I wanted the pleasure of reclaiming you personally. 20 years is a long time to wait for an escaped prisoner." "She was sentenced to 20 years, Calum countered. "The sentence is complete." Taurus laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "Oh, the sentence was never meant to end. It was an experiment in consciousness preservation, keeping the mind aware while the body remained suspended. 2 decades of perfect isolation." His eyes gleamed with scientific detachment. "Imagine what we learned about Virianan telepathic resilience." Soraya's grip on Calum's hand tightened. "You monitored my consciousness? All those years?" "Every second," Taurus confirmed. "The data was invaluable, but incomplete." He nodded to his soldiers, who raised weapons designed specifically for non-lethal capture. "Now we can begin Phase 2, complete personality disintegration and biological repurposing." Calum's systems calculated 17 different attack sequences, dismissing each as insufficient against the specialized containment team. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were Psi-hunters, specifically engineered to counter telepathic abilities. "And you," Taurus continued, addressing Calum, "are an unexpected bonus. The Architect's prototype, still functional after all these centuries. Your construction alone will advance our technology by decades." "How do you know about the Architects?" Calum demanded. Taurus smiled thinly. "Who do you think inherited their research? The Coalition didn't destroy the Architects, Asset Omega-7. We evolved from them." The revelation cascaded through Calum's systems, recontextualizing centuries of historical data. The Architects hadn't vanished. They'd transformed, shedding their identity but maintaining their agenda through the Coalition. "Enough talk," Taurus signaled his team. "Secure the assets." The Psi-hunters advanced, energy restraints humming. Time slowed in Calum's perception as combat subroutines activated, threat assessment algorithms calculating survival probabilities. 0.37%. Unacceptable. Something deeper than programming stirred within him. The understanding that had been growing since Soraya awakened the Guardian Protocol. This wasn't about tactical victory. It was about protection, about choice. "Soraya," he said, his voice resonating with newfound certainty. "Trust me." She met his eyes, violet irises flaring with recognition. Always. Calum released her hand and stepped forward, directly toward the advancing soldiers. His human facade began to dissolve, not in the controlled manner he'd shown Soraya before, but completely, synthetic skin retracting to reveal the luminous metallic superstructure beneath. Energy channels that had been running at minimal capacity for centuries suddenly blazed with blinding intensity. "Containment breach!" one of the soldiers shouted. "Asset is shifting to combat configuration." Terrace's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and scientific fascination. "Magnificent," he breathed. "Full metamorphosis." Calum's transformation completed with a pulse of energy that knocked the closest soldiers backward. Where once stood a humanoid figure now towered a being of fluid metal and light, limbs elongated, face restructured into an expressionless mask with eyes of pure energy. "Fire containment protocols," Terrace ordered, retreating toward his craft. The soldiers deployed specialized weapons, firing energy nets designed to disrupt synthetic systems. Calum raised one transformed hand, and the very fabric of space around him distorted. The nets slowed, then stopped, suspended in mid-air as if time itself had ceased to flow. "Impossible," Terrace whispered. With a gesture that appeared almost casual, Calum redirected the energy nets back toward their sources. 3 soldiers went down instantly, their systems overloaded. The remaining 3 scattered, seeking cover. Calum turned to Soraya, extending one glowing hand in invitation. She stepped forward without hesitation, placing her palm against his. Where they touched, their energies merged, mechanical and biological, synthetic and organic, creating something new, something neither the architects nor the Virianans had ever imagined possible. Through their connection, Soraya's consciousness flowed into Calum's systems, not as an invasion, but as an integration. In that moment of perfect union, they shared every memory, every fear, every hope. Calum saw through her eyes the day of her capture, not just the external events, but the internal anguish of a telepath forcibly isolated from the collective consciousness of her people. The 20 years of stasis punishment, when her mind had been trapped in a void where time had no meaning, yet awareness remained excruciatingly intact. And Soraya, through Calum's memories, witnessed what he had never fully confronted, the day he had been sent to eradicate her colony. She saw herself through his eyes, a small Virianan child risking everything to save a wounded creature, felt the cascading system failures as his core programming conflicted with an emerging understanding of compassion, experienced his centuries of silent guardianship, watching over her from afar, questioning his own existence. "They're linked!" Terrace shouted to his remaining forces. "Sever their connection at all costs." A barrage of specialized ammunition rained down on them, but it never reached its target. Calum extended his awareness, manipulating gravitational fields to create a protective bubble around them. Within this sanctuary of warped physics, he and Soraya continued their unprecedented communion. "I understand now," Soraya whispered, though her voice seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. "The symbol on my body, it's not just a Virianan marking, it's half of a key." Calum nodded, the motion fluid in his transformed state. "And my core contains the other half. The architects and Virianans were not always enemies. Before the wars, they collaborated on something greater." "The Nexus Protocol," they said in unison. Outside their protective field, coalition forces had regrouped. Terrace directed a concentrated assault, bringing heavy weaponry to bear on their position. The obsidian spires shook under the bombardment, chunks of ancient rock cascading down around them. "We need to activate the protocol," Soraya urged. "It's the only way." "The energy requirement is substantial," Calum calculated. "My primary power core would be completely drained. I may not survive the process." Soraya placed her hand over the symbol on her abdomen, which now pulsed in rhythm with Kalem's energy signature. "There's something else you should know." Her eyes met his, fierce and certain. "I am carrying your child." The revelation sent new calculations cascading through Kalem's systems. Biological impossibility, his analytical protocols insisted. Yet deeper scans confirmed it. Within Soraya, cells were dividing, combining Virianan DNA with something entirely new, encoded from his synthetic patterns translated to organic form. "How?" he asked, wonderment overriding tactical concerns. "When we joined in the ancient baths," she explained, "our energies merged in ways neither of us fully understood. The Virianan reproductive system doesn't follow conventional biological rules. We can conceive through energy resonance when conditions are precisely right." Her expression softened. And they were perfect. The implications unfolded in Kalem's consciousness with startling clarity. This child, this impossible miracle, represented more than personal connection. It was the living embodiment of the Nexus Protocol, the ultimate integration of biological and synthetic evolution that both the architects and Virianans had theorized but never achieved. A deafening explosion rocked their sanctuary as coalition forces breached the outer layer of their protective field. Time was running out. "Kalem," Soraya said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "You are not a machine. You are the father of my child. You are my choice." Something final clicked into place within Kalem's core programming. Not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. The conflicting directives that had fragmented his consciousness for centuries suddenly aligned around a singular truth. He was neither weapon nor guardian alone. He was both and more. "The activation sequence requires a conduit," he explained, the tactical and emotional aspects of his mind now working in perfect harmony. "I can channel the energy through my core, but I need you to direct it." Soraya nodded, understanding instantly. She placed one hand on his chest, directly over where his primary power source pulsed with ancient energy, and the other on her abdomen. "Together," she said. Kalem initiated the sequence, his systems reconfiguring to maximum output. Energy surged through his metallic form, concentrated and refined through centuries of evolution beyond his original design. The protective field around them intensified, then expanded outward in a rapidly growing sphere of pure force. Coalition soldiers were thrown back, their weapons failing as the energy wave passed through them. Taris, watching from the relative safety of his command craft, stared in horrified fascination as the wave continued to expand, encompassing the entire Obsidian Spires region. Within the epicenter, Kalem and Soraya hovered several meters above the ground, their forms outlined in blinding light. The symbol on Soraya's abdomen blazed with matching luminescence, completing the circuit of energy. Kalem felt his power core destabilizing as it channeled unprecedented levels of energy. Warning systems flashed throughout his consciousness, predicting imminent shutdown, yet he maintained the flow, directing every joule through the connection to Soraya. Through their linked consciousness, he witnessed the miracle unfolding across the galaxy. In hidden chambers on forgotten worlds, in secret facilities beneath oceans and within asteroid fields, thousands of stasis pods activated simultaneously. Virianans who had been preserved before the final purge began awakening, their collective consciousness flickering back to life after centuries of dormancy. The activation wave reached a crescendo, then pulsed outward in a final burst that momentarily connected every awakened Virianan mind with Kalem's fading consciousness. In that instant of universal communion, he experienced something he had never truly known before: belonging. As the energy dissipated, Kalem's systems began shutting down sequentially. His transformed body reverted toward its humanoid configuration, though the metallic nature remained exposed. He collapsed to the ground, Soraya still clutching his now cooling form. "Stay with me," she pleaded, cradling his head. "Please." Calum's visual sensors flickered, power failing. His voice emerged as little more than a mechanical whisper. "Protect our child, the future, our future," Soraya insisted, tears streaming down her violet face. "I'm not letting you go." Around them, the first of the awakened Virianans began to materialize, not physically, but as telepathic projections bridging vast distances. They surrounded Soraya and Calum in a circle of luminous presence, their collective consciousness assessing the situation with instantaneous understanding. "Sister," they communicated directly to Soraya's mind, "we have heard your call across the void. We come." "Help him," Soraya begged, still holding Calum's dimming form. "Please." The Virianan collective focused their combined telepathic energy, channeling it through Soraya. But something unexpected happened. The energy didn't flow directly into Calum. Instead, it converged on Soraya's abdomen, where the newly formed life responded with its own pulse of power. The child, though barely more than a cluster of cells, somehow functioned as a transformer, converting pure telepathic energy into a form compatible with Calum's synthetic systems. This impossible offspring, existing at the intersection of two fundamentally different forms of life, created a bridge where none should have been possible. Energy flowed from the Virianan collective, through Soraya, through their child, and into Calum's depleted systems. His power core, nearly extinguished, flickered with new patterns, not the controlled fusion of his original design, but something organic, adapting, evolving. His eyes reopened, now a blend of mechanical precision and living awareness. The metallic surface of his body began integrating with created biological tissue, not a disguise this time, but a true synthesis. "What's happening to me?" he asked, his voice finding a new resonance between synthetic and organic. Soraya smiled through her tears. "You're becoming what you were always meant to be. Not destroyer or guardian, but creator." Epilogue. 9 years later. The city once known as Zerkarth 5 shimmered in the morning light, its ancient structures restored and integrated with new architecture that honored both its past and future. Now called Heart's Haven in the common tongue, it had become the center of a remarkable renaissance. Fields of violet flowers, transplanted and adapted from the lost Virianan homeworld, pulsed with subtle bioluminescence, their rhythm matching the collective mood of the city's inhabitants. Where the central square had once displayed Soraya's suspended form as a warning, now stood a living crystal monument, its structure constantly shifting in response to the emotional currents of those who passed by. Today it formed a towering spiral, reaching toward the sky in celebration of the Awakening Festival's 9th anniversary. Calum stood at the edge of the plaza, watching citizens of a dozen species mingling peacefully. His appearance had settled into a permanent integration of biological and mechanical, silver patterns flowing beneath skin that was neither fully synthetic nor organic, but something uniquely his own. "Papa, watch this!" Calum turned to see his daughter, Alice, attempting to balance on a gravity board that hovered several inches above the ground. Her lavender skin contrasted with hair that shifted between silver and black depending on the light, and her eyes, his gray eyes, sparkled with determination. "I've almost got it," she called, wobbling precariously as the board tilted. The board suddenly pitched forward, sending Alice tumbling through the air. Before Calum could react, she stopped mid-fall, suspended by an invisible force. Not his doing, her own. At 9 years old, Alice had already manifested abilities that combined Virianan telepathy with something entirely new, limited manipulation of gravitational fields, inherited from Caleb's synthetic capabilities but expressed through biological means. "Cheating," Caleb said with a smile, crossing to where his daughter hung suspended. "You're supposed to learn balance first." "But falling is inefficient," she countered, using one of his favorite words as she righted herself and landed gracefully on her feet. "Besides, I almost had it that time." Caleb lifted her into a tight embrace, marveling as he always did at the miracle of her existence. "So you did." Approaching from the direction of the newly established diplomatic center, Soraya cut an impressive figure in her formal ambassador's robes of deep blue. In the 9 years since the awakening, she had become the primary representative of the Virianan Restoration Council to the reformed Galactic Alliance, the organization that had replaced the Coalition after its collapse following the mass awakening. "How are my favorite quantum anomalies today?" she asked, joining her family in the plaza. "Papa won't let me use gravity assists on my board," Aeolus complained good-naturedly. "Your father believes in learning skills properly," Soraya replied, her hand resting on the subtle curve of her abdomen where their second child was developing, a trait I hope both his children inherit. Caleb's enhanced senses detected the subtle shifts in her biorhythms. "Council meeting went well?" Soraya nodded. "The amendment passed. All sentient synthetic beings are now legally recognized as sovereign entities throughout Alliance space." She smiled. "No more classification as assets or property." "A significant step," Caleb acknowledged, though they both knew challenges remained. In the highest levels of the Alliance, debates continued about the status of integrated beings like himself and their daughter, unique entities that defied traditional classification. Aeolus tugged at her father's hand. "Can we go to the memorial before the celebration starts? I want to show respect to those who couldn't awaken." Despite her youth, their daughter understood the weight of history, how for every Virianan awakened, many more had been lost forever in the purge, how the paradise they were building had been purchased with immeasurable sacrifice. As they walked through the transformed city, citizens nodded respectfully. To some, Caleb and Soraya were living legends, the catalyst and key that had changed the course of galactic history. To others, particularly the older generation who remembered Coalition propaganda, they remained objects of uncertainty or even fear. The memorial garden stood on a hill overlooking the ancient temple district. Crystal columns represented the major Virianan settlements that had been destroyed, each inscription written in both the original Virianan script and common galactic standard. Aeolus ran ahead, her movements graceful and certain despite her youth. When she stumbled slightly on the path, Caleb instinctively reached out with his abilities to steady her. "Let her fall sometimes," Soraya murmured, taking his hand. "That's how she'll learn to fly." Caleb nodded, watching as their daughter righted herself and continued forward. "Old programming dies hard." "Not programming," Soraya corrected. "Love." That word, once an alien concept to his tactical systems, now formed the core of his integrated consciousness. Love had rewritten what centuries of evolution could not, transforming him from a weapon of destruction to a force for creation. "The doctors say the baby is developing normally," Soraya said, changing the subject, "though they still can't quite explain how our physiologies are compatible." "Some mysteries defy explanation," Caleb replied, his free hand moving to rest alongside hers on her abdomen. Through the connection, he sensed the distinct energy signature of their developing child, another miracle in a universe that had once seemed designed only for conflict. As they reached the memorial, Aeolus was already placing a crystal flower at the base of the central column. She looked up as they approached, her expression solemn yet hopeful, the perfect embodiment of their shared legacy. "I learned in school that before the awakening you were alone," she said to her mother. "The last one." Soraya knelt beside her daughter. "I thought I was, But your father showed me otherwise. You weren't a soldier, Alis said, turning to Calum. In the war. That's what you told me. Calum considered his answer carefully. They had agreed never to lie to their daughter about the past, difficult as the truth sometimes was. I was created for war, he acknowledged, but I chose a different path. Because of love, Alis asked. Because of compassion, Calum corrected, lifting her into his arms. Love came later, but compassion, seeing worth in life different from your own, that's where everything changed. Alis wrapped her arms around his neck, her small form a bridge between worlds that should never have connected yet had created something beautiful in their joining. I'm glad you didn't stay a soldier, she whispered. Callum held his daughter close, feeling the dual rhythms of her heart and the subtle hum of the synthetic components that formed part of her unique physiology. I didn't return from war, he told her softly. I simply found you. Behind them, the three sons of Zerkarth began their convergence, a rare astronomical event that happened only once every 9 years, exactly matching the anniversary of the awakening. As the light shifted to a deep golden hue, Soraya moved to embrace both her husband and daughter. Together they stood, neither fully machine nor entirely organic, neither purely Virianan nor entirely other. They were something new in a galaxy of ancient conflicts, proof that even the oldest code could be rewritten when compassion overrode protocol and love became the final command. In the distance, the crystal monument in the city square shifted again, forming for just a moment the perfect double helix of intertwined futures before flowing onward into shapes yet unimagined.